What's up, Folkwax? Today's video is a take 2 on the Artx watercolor pencils video because the first one I mentioned I screwed up a lot in it and I wasn't really using them in the best way. So this one I'm going to be trying something different, and actually the end result came out so well that I'm like, you know what, okay, I'm really proud of how this looked and I'm really happy with it, and also it's very aesthetic. So for this I did something kind of simple. I made this simple collage and pix art, and it's sort of Juminocore inspired, and basically I just kind of did it in that sketchbook that I received from Artx. In the last video it's very small, so I was worried that the entire collage wouldn't fit, but I made it work. It's not entirely perfect, but that's okay. I was using it more as a basis because I didn't really know what else to draw, so I wanted to do something different. Also, I just don't work with reds and greens very often in general. I always tend to go to pink and purple and blue as my default, so I went with red and green this time because if you see my community posts, I've been making a lot of I have been kind of getting into more red and green aesthetics and whatnot, so yeah. So here's what I did differently this time. So RX actually sent me like a link to a video, which I'll leave in the description, sort of a simple video on how to use watercolor pencils, and I feel so silly. So this is how you use color pencils in general, is that you go from dark to light. So in any area you want to put shadows is where you put them, and then you sort of build up from there. So once you put down your shadows, then you put down your like second shadow, and then you put your lightest color, and then that's when you take your watercolor brush, and then you sort of brush to get all the pigments, so that way you get that watercolor look. And generally speaking, from what I've seen, you go from the darkest to lightest, because that way I guess it's more easier to transition. But I guess you can go from light to dark. I think it's just easier to go from dark to light, because it's easier to blend the dark part with the lighter part rather than vice versa. But I guess either one works. Anyway, I was really happy when I did this, because wow, when I like laid down the watercolor brush, it was very saturated and smooth, and it's just because of the paper quality of the sketchbook. It was very smooth, and there is a bit of that like color pencil texture, but I think it adds to the overall look of it, and I really love it. So yeah, like this in this video you're gonna see like, yeah, the watercolor pencils are very vibrant and deep. Like the colors look very rich. And I think because I use green and red specifically, it's very apparent, because red is such a deep color, and I think that really helps exemplify that. Once I was done laying down all of the colors and shading, I went back once again to add some extra depth, because I wanted it to look, I didn't want the overall colors to look flat. I wanted it to look three-dimensional, since the collage had a bunch of like 3D-ish objects and pretty deep shading, so I wanted to kind of replicate that. And I will admit, it wasn't the easiest, because the sketchbook is so tiny, so it wasn't exactly as easy to get like all the little intricate details, but I tried my best, and I think I did a decent job at that. So I went back again, and this is where I did that sort of thing where I dipped my colored pencil in the water, and then I went over everything. That kind of helped with blending, and I think that's what I was supposed to have done, instead of just doing that like entirely for that oil pastel look. Not that the oil pastel look was bad, but you know, that was more so just to help with blending and like more saturated areas. So near the end, I wanted to experiment a little bit. So I don't know if there's like a term for this. I mean, there probably is. Like, you know how in some artwork, you'll have like a blue underlight or something like that, like under the shading. I wanted to see if like how much you could build on top of the layers of the pencil, and it was somewhat visible, but not by much, and that's okay. I wasn't really baking on that like being a big deal. I was just trying to experiment a little bit, but I did want to see how the white color pencil would turn out, since usually with color pencils the white one is the blender, but because these are watercolor pencils and you can kind of layer everything on top of each other, I wanted to see if the white would like lighten things, and it did. It actually blended things, and it also, when I put on top the apples and like the other things like the buttons and whatnot, it actually did show up. It wasn't super duper bright, which is fine. I wasn't trying to go for like bright white. I was trying to go for like sort of a translucent white, and I was like, wow, okay, this looks pretty good. So yeah, if you're using these pencils and you want to have like a nice shine that's not super bright, adding the white color pencil on top of it definitely helps. But of course, you know, you gotta make sure that that area in particular is somewhat light enough. So these are pretty good for highlights, but not for like super bright highlights. These are for more like translucent highlights or some sort of that sort of translucent detail if you want that for your color pencils. And that's another thing I learned, is to let everything dry instead of just going back at it again when it's still wet. And it didn't take long to dry. It took a couple of seconds, maybe it took like a minute, and then I could go back again. But since I did kind of everything at once, it did take a little bit longer. But once I did, there was no like warping or buckling or anything like that. It just, everything laid still, and I could easily go back to it without any issue, which I really appreciate. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this second attempt at the ArtX watercolor pencils, and I'll see you quacks later.